It all started like every love story people dream about, the kind that feels too perfect to ever fall apart. His smile had a way of disarming me, like it could melt through every wall I had built around my heart. He said all the right things at all the right times, and I wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, I had finally found someone who saw me for who I really was. The late-night calls, the constant laughter, the promises whispered in the dark, all of it painted a picture of a love so pure that it almost felt unreal. He knew how to make me feel special, as if the universe had conspired to bring us together after a lifetime of waiting. When I looked at him, I didn't just see a man, I saw a future, a sense of belonging, a home I had never known before. The way he'd look at me across a crowded room made me feel like the only person in the world. Every little gesture, every touch, every word felt like proof that we were something rare. People around us used to call us the perfect couple, and I used to smile because deep down I believed them. There was comfort in that illusion, a warmth that wrapped around my soul and made me forget how fragile happiness can be. He had this way of convincing me that what we had was unshakable, that no storm could reach us. And I, blind in love, never questioned the small inconsistencies, the late replies, the vague excuses, the nights that felt just a bit too quiet. Love has a strange way of muting your instincts, making you believe in the beauty of what you want instead of the truth of what you have. I remember the first time he told me he loved me. It was raining outside, the kind of rain that seems to wash away everything except the moment you're in. His voice was soft, trembling a little, and I thought that trembling was emotion, not guilt. I thought those words were real, carved from sincerity, not from manipulation. I held on to that memory like it was sacred, like it was proof that love existed in its purest form. Every time he said it afterward, it became a mantra I repeated to myself whenever doubts tried to whisper otherwise. I told myself that no one would ever love me like he did, that what we had was once in a lifetime. He made me trust him completely. I gave him access to parts of me I never shared with anyone else, my fears, my dreams, my vulnerabilities. He didn't just hold my hand, he held my confidence, my faith in love, my belief that people can be genuine. I built my days around him, my nights around his voice, my hopes around his presence. When he smiled, my world felt balanced. When he was distant, everything felt off-kilter. I didn't realize then that my happiness had become dependent on someone who only cared about his own. I mistook control for care, manipulation for affection, lies for devotion. The illusion was so perfectly crafted that even my closest friends couldn't see through it. They envied me, admired us, said we were proof that true love still existed. And I wore that admiration like armor, believing it protected me from heartbreak. I ignored every red flag because acknowledging them would have meant admitting that my dream was built on deception. I told myself he was just busy, just tired, just distracted. I told myself that every relationship goes through phases, that love doesn't always look like the movies. I defended him, even to myself, because the thought of losing him was more painful than the reality I refused to see. He had a charm that could silence suspicion. Every time doubt crept in, he would pull me close, look me in the eyes, and say something that made everything feel okay again. It was like he knew the exact words to reset my heart, to make me forget the unease gnawing at the edges of my mind. I didn't realize he wasn't fixing the problem, he was hiding it. Every "I love you" was a distraction, every romantic gesture a cover-up. He wasn't loving me, he was keeping me blind, and I let him. But in those early days, before the mask began to slip, I was happy. Truly, stupidly, deeply happy. I woke up smiling for no reason, humming songs under my breath, dreaming of tomorrows that never came. I thought love was supposed to feel like that, like sunshine after years of rain. I didn't know that sometimes that warmth is just the fire that's slowly burning you from within. He had convinced me that we were perfect together, that our bond was unbreakable, and I held on to that belief with both hands because it was all I ever wanted, to be loved, to be chosen, to be enough. There were moments that now replay in my mind with a different clarity. The times he would go silent mid-conversation, the sudden change in his schedule, the way he'd smile at his phone before putting it face down. Back then, I brushed it off, blaming myself for overthinking. I told myself not to ruin something good with suspicion. I had no idea that while I was busy protecting our love, he was busy dismantling it piece by piece behind my back. But at that stage, all I saw was the illusion, beautiful, fragile, and painfully believable. I remember how he'd tell me I was the best thing that ever happened to him, how he couldn't imagine life without me. I used to think those words meant safety, but now I know they were promises meant to anchor me deeper into his world, to make me trust him even when I shouldn't. He made sure I felt secure enough to stop questioning, confident enough to stop doubting. And in doing so, the truth never arrives with a warning, it creeps in silently, disguised as doubt, as a strange feeling in your gut that something isn't quite right. It started small for me, a few unanswered calls, a shift in his tone, a growing distance I couldn't explain. I told myself he was just busy, that work was taking a toll, that I was overthinking. But deep down, I knew something had changed. The warmth in his messages turned colder, the way he looked at me lacked the spark that once set my heart on fire. His words felt rehearsed, his hugs felt rushed, and his excuses became more frequent than his apologies. I tried to ignore the ache in my chest, the fear whispering that love doesn't fade this quietly unless something, or someone, is replacing it. One night, I remember asking him if everything was okay. He smiled that same practiced smile, the one that once made me feel safe, and said, "Of course, why wouldn't it be?" But the eyes that once spoke truth now looked away too quickly. His phone, once left carelessly around, became his most guarded possession. He started keeping it face down, silenced, tucked away in his pocket like a secret he couldn't let me see. He laughed less, stayed out later, and his scent, once familiar and comforting, began to carry traces of someone else's perfume. I tried to convince myself I was imagining it, that paranoia was eating away at the love we had built. I didn't want to be the jealous, suspicious partner, so I stayed silent, even as the silence between us grew louder than words ever could. The night I found out the truth, it wasn't through a confession or a fight. It was through a message that wasn't meant for me. His phone buzzed beside me when he was in the shower, and something, curiosity, instinct, heartbreak, pushed me to look. What I saw shattered me in a way I didn't know was possible. The words on that screen weren't innocent, they were intimate, familiar, filled with the same phrases he once said to me. He wasn't just cheating on M. When he walked out of the shower, smiling like nothing had happened, I looked at him differently for the first time. I saw not the man I loved, but the man who had lied to me with ease. I asked him about the message, my voice trembling but steady enough to make him freeze. His expression changed in an instant, his charm crumbling under the weight of exposure. He stuttered, denied, then blamed me for invading his privacy. It was almost laughable, how quickly guilt turns to anger when a liar is caught. He told me it wasn't what it looked like, that I was overreacting, that I was making assumptions. But you don't need an explanation when the truth is staring you in the face. The days that followed were a blur of pain and disbelief. Every memory, every moment, every word we had shared replayed in my mind like a cruel movie I couldn't turn off. I tried to find the moment it all went wrong, the day he stopped loving me, the reason he needed someone else. But there was no single reason, no warning sign big enough to see. It was gradual, like watching a fire die out while still sitting in the ashes, refusing to believe it's over. I couldn't understand how someone could claim to love you and still destroy you in the same breath. I kept asking myself why I wasn't enough, what she had that I didn't, what part of me made it so easy for him to replace me. The questions had no answers, only echoes that deepened the hurt. I stopped eating, stopped sleeping, stopped recognizing the person I saw in the mirror. I had become a ghost in my own life, haunted by the truth I couldn't unsee. People say time heals everything, but in those moments, time felt like an enemy. Every passing second reminded me that the person who once held my heart now held someone else's. I wanted to hate him, but hate felt too heavy, too consuming. What I felt instead was emptiness, the kind that sits in your chest and refuses to leave. I tried to fill it with anger, with tears, with anything that made me feel. He tried to come back, of course. They always do. With apologies that sounded practiced, with tears that felt staged, with promises I'd heard too many times before. He said he made a mistake, that she meant nothing, that he wanted to fix things. But you can't fix something you deliberately destroyed. The trust was gone, the love was poisoned, and I couldn't unsee the truth. Every word he said after that sounded hollow, every touch felt foreign. The man I once loved was gone, replaced by a stranger wearing his face. In the quiet after the storm, I started piecing myself back together. Slowly, painfully, I began to understand that his betrayal said nothing about my worth and everything about his weakness. I realized that people who cheat aren't searching for love, they're running from themselves. They crave validation, not connection, power, not partnership. And I had given him all the love he couldn't even recognize. The truth didn't just reveal who he was, it revealed who I had been, too trusting, too forgiving, too willing to believe in someone who never deserved it. Finding out the truth was like standing in the middle of a burning house, watching everything I built turn to ashes while knowing I couldn't save it. But somewhere in those ashes, there was clarity. The illusion was gone, the lies had crumbled, and all that was left was me, the real me, bruised but breathing, broken but awake to the truth I had been too blind to see. The moment I discovered his betrayal, something inside me shifted. It wasn't immediate rage, not even tears, just a deep hollow silence that echoed through my entire being. It felt as if the world around me had frozen, like every heartbeat was suspended in disbelief. I wanted to scream, but the pain was too heavy for sound. The man I had trusted with my whole heart had turned my love into a lie, and the realization didn't just hurt, it rewired something in me. I stood there, staring at the remnants of the person I used to be, realizing that the nights that followed were the hardest. Sleep wouldn't come, and when it did, it brought dreams that felt like nightmares, memories of laughter, of warmth, of words that once made my heart race now haunting me like ghosts. I kept replaying everything in my head, searching for signs, wondering how I missed the truth staring right at me. Every small detail became a clue, every affectionate gesture a reminder of the deception hiding behind it. My mind became a battlefield where anger fought grief, and pride wrestled with pain. I wanted to forget, but forgetting felt like forgiving, and I wasn't ready to do that. There comes a point where heartbreak transforms from sadness into something sharper. The tears dry up, the trembling stops, and what's left is a cold, focused calm. That's where I found myself, not broken, but burning with a quiet determination. I realized that pain, when pushed too far, doesn't just destroy, it transforms. It strips away naivety, innocence, softness, and replaces them with something harder, colder, wiser. I could feel that transformation taking root inside me. I wasn't the same woman who once waited for his messages, who smiled at his lies, who believed his promises. I was someone new, someone who no longer needed his validation to feel alive. I remember standing in front of the mirror one morning, my reflection a stranger's face. My eyes looked different, emptier yes, but stronger too. The softness he once admired had turned into something fierce. I didn't want to be the victim of his story, I wanted to rewrite mine. That was the moment the breaking point became my beginning. Pain has a strange way of clearing your vision, of forcing you to see the world for what it truly is. And what I saw was a man who didn't deserve the power he still had over me. Every tear I had shed was fuel, every sleepless night was a lesson. People often say revenge is dangerous, that it consumes you, but what they don't understand is that sometimes revenge isn't about destruction, it's about reclamation. It's about taking back the power that was stolen from you, about showing yourself that you are not as fragile as they made you feel. I didn't want to hurt him physically or publicly, I wanted him to feel the same helplessness he left me drowning in. I wanted him to know what it's like to lose something you can never get back. My pain wasn't going to be wasted, it was going to be transformed into purpose. The first step was silence. I stopped answering his calls, stopped explaining, stopped seeking closure from someone who never cared enough to offer it. My silence spoke louder than any words could. He expected tears, he expected begging, he expected me to crumble, but all he got was stillness. The same stillness that comes before a storm. I could see his confusion, his attempts to pull me back into his orbit, his efforts to twist the story and play the victim. But I had already detached. His words no longer reached me the way they used to. I was done being his emotional puppet. There's a strange power in realizing you have nothing left to lose. Once the worst has already happened, fear loses its grip. I started focusing on myself, not in the way I used to, but with a raw intensity that scared even me. I began to rebuild quietly, redirecting all that emotion inward. I stopped trying to understand why he did what he did and started asking myself why I tolerated it for so long. That shift in focus changed everything. The pain didn't disappear overnight, but it started to sharpen into clarity. I began to see him for what he really was, a man who mistook my kindness for weakness, my forgiveness for foolishness. The more I healed, the more I realized how much of myself I had lost in trying to keep him. Love had blinded me, made me smaller, made me bend just to keep him comfortable. I had silenced my instincts, ignored my needs, dimmed my own light so he could shine brighter. But now, the balance had changed. Every time I thought about what he did, the hurt began to fade, replaced by resolve. I didn't want to be consumed by hate, but I also didn't want to let him walk away thinking he had won. He needed to feel the weight of his actions, the sting of losing what he took for granted. It wasn't about petty revenge, it was about justice, emotional justice. I didn't need to raise my voice or expose his lies. Life has a way of catching up with people like him. All I needed to do was rise, quietly, powerfully, and make sure he saw it. I wanted him to look at me and realize that the woman he thought he broke was still standing, stronger than ever, unbothered, untouchable. That was the revenge, my strength, my peace, my refusal to let his betrayal define me. There's something liberating about reaching your breaking point, because once you've broken, nothing else can break you the same way again. The pain becomes armor, the memories become lessons, and the person you become afterward is unstoppable. I no longer feared losing people, I feared losing myself again. The love I once gave so freely, I now guarded fiercely. He taught me that not everyone deserves access to your heart, and sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't what you do to them, it's what you become after them. Revenge was never the first thought that crossed my mind, but pain has a way of planting seeds you didn't know could grow inside you. I spent days trying to make sense of everything, drowning in the chaos he left behind. My heart kept asking why, but my mind had already stopped expecting an answer. Eventually, the sadness began to fade, replaced by something sharper, something colder, a need to reclaim what he took from me. It wasn't about hurting him the way he hurt me, it was about balance, about taking back control in a situation where I had been stripped of it completely. He thought I was broken, that I would sit quietly in the ruins of what he destroyed, but I was only waiting, watching, thinking, calculating. The moment I stopped crying was the moment he lost his power. The plan didn't form overnight. It began slowly, taking shape in the quiet hours when I couldn't sleep, in the silence of those long nights when my thoughts refused to rest. I started remembering the things he loved, the things that defined him, the parts of his life that gave him pride. He had built his whole identity around one thing, something he worshipped more than love, more than loyalty, more than me. It was his obsession, the one thing he couldn't live without. And that became my focus. If he could take away my peace, then I would take away what gave him his. My revenge wouldn't be loud or messy. It would be precise, poetic, and clean. He wouldn't see it coming until it was already too late. I started by pretending everything was normal. I smiled when he spoke, acted distant but not bitter, calm but unreadable. It confused him, and that confusion was my first victory. He couldn't understand how I wasn't falling apart, how I could look him in the eyes and not tremble. What he didn't realize was that indifference cuts deeper than anger ever could. I let him believe that I was healing, that maybe I was learning to forgive him, and he relaxed just enough for me to move in silence. Every word. He had something he valued more than anything, his reputation, his image, the way people saw him. To the world, he was charming, successful, untouchable. He lived for validation, for admiration, for that constant applause that fed his ego. I had seen how fragile it really was, how easily it could crumble if someone just nudged the right piece out of place. So, I became the quiet hand behind that nudge. I didn't need to destroy him publicly, I just needed to make him doubt himself, to watch him unravel the same way he made me. I learned his weaknesses, not the ones he showed me before, but the hidden ones, the insecurities he tried to bury under arrogance. Those became my tools. I began collecting the truths he had buried, the lies he had told others, the small betrayals that had built his perfect mask. I didn't rush, I was patient, methodical. While he thought I was forgiving, I was documenting, remembering every word, every inconsistency. And when the time was right, I let the truth slip through the cracks, small truths, whispered in the right ears, placed in the right moments, enough to make people question the image he worked so hard to protect. I never had to raise my voice, I never had to confront him. I simply let the truth do the work that vengeance never could. Watching him squirm under the weight of his own lies was more satisfying than any outburst could ever be. But revenge isn't only about what you do to them, it's also about what you do for yourself. I started rebuilding quietly, piece by piece. I focused on becoming someone so untouchable that he couldn't reach me, not even in memory. I turned every ounce of pain he caused into fuel. The more I grew, the smaller he looked. I took back every part of me that I had given to him. My confidence, my peace, my laughter, they were all mine again, and taking them back was my ultimate act of defiance. Every time he saw me moving forward without him, I could see it in his eyes, the disbelief, the regret, the confusion. He tried to come back, to talk, to explain himself as if words could rebuild what he burned. But I didn't need his explanations anymore. I listened with the same calm he once used to manipulate me, except now, it was me who held the power. He talked about missing me, about making mistakes, about wanting another chance. And I smiled because I finally understood. He didn't miss me, he missed control. He missed being the center of my world, the reason for my happiness. But that part of me no longer existed. I had learned to find happiness in silence, in independence, in knowing that he could no longer hurt me. The plan I set in motion wasn't about destruction, it was about transformation. I didn't want him ruined, I wanted him haunted. Haunted by the realization that I no longer cared, that his actions no longer defined me, that I was thriving in a life where he no longer existed. And nothing punishes a narcissist more than indifference. He began to spiral, trying to win back what he had lost, but the harder he tried, the more obvious it became that the power had shifted. I didn't need to shout my revenge to the world, I carried it quietly, in the way I walked, in the way I smiled, in the way I refused to look back. Every person has a breaking point, and I had reached mine. But instead of shattering, I turned it into strategy. My revenge wasn't fueled by hate, it was built on self-respect. I wanted him to feel the emptiness he left me with, to experience the loss of something irreplaceable. And the truth was, the one thing he loved most wasn't an object, or a title, or even his reputation, it was control. Taking that away from him was my masterpiece. Watching him lose his grip on me, on himself, on the image he had created, was the quietest yet most satisfying victory I could ever imagine. He thought the ultimate wound he left me with was indifference, that if I stopped caring he'd win by default, but what he never counted on was my insistence on fairness, on making the ledger even without becoming him. The payback I planned wasn't born from a desire to humiliate or to lash out in public, it came from a steadier, colder place, the conviction that what he had stolen from me deserved a precise, calibrated response. I wasn't interested in spectacle. I wanted justice that fit the crime, a reclamation that would make him understand the gravity of his choice by removing the thing he treated like a right rather than a responsibility. He loved his comforts, his image, the routine that reassured him he was untouchable. I decided to take the one thing that made him feel safe and untouchable and show him how exposed he could be without it. The plan was simple in its cruelty and merciful in its restraint. Instead of tearing down everything at once, I targeted the core, what he held most dear, not because it was precious but because it fed his ego. Where others might have sought revenge through drama, I chose the surgical route, reclaim what belonged to me, reveal the truth to those who mattered, and let consequence do the rest. I took care not to become vindictive. Vindictiveness would have blurred the moral line I wanted to stand on. This was not a performance of vengeance for likes or whispers. It was a quiet, controlled reclamation that left no room for misinterpretation. I would take back what was mine and in doing so, take from him the comfort of believing he could act without accountability. It began with the small things, documents he'd tucked away in my name, passwords he assumed I'd never touch, accounts he'd set up to benefit himself but that bore my labor, my financial trust, my time. I knew the value of each piece, not just in money but in symbolism. Taking back those things was more than material, it was the undoing of a narrative he'd written where I was merely collateral. I retrieved what I had a right to, not with malice but with the steady force of rightful reclamation. There was a satisfaction in the legal, in the methodical transfer of ownership. The law doesn't have drama, it has paperwork and signatures and the uncomfortable finality of official seals. Watching names change on official forms felt like setting small fires in the edifices of his assurance. But the ultimate payback required more than paperwork. He cared deeply about his public persona, how he appeared at gatherings, the friends who mirrored him, the businesses that vouched for him. Reputation for him was currency, and I learned to spend it wisely. I began to seed the right conversations with the right people, not with lies but with truths that had weight because they were verifiable. I let the facts speak in boardrooms, in whispered meetings, in offhand comments that rippled outward. People noticed discrepancies, then patterns. His polished image started to tarnish not from rumor but from accumulation, small true details that together formed a credible picture of the man behind the mask. That slow corrosion was deliberate. It taught him that prestige built on deception is fragile and that the people he performed for would choose clarity over charisma when offered both. There was a moment when he realized I wasn't merely hurting, I was reclaiming. He watched as respect that had been his by default slipped, as allies grew cautious, as partners reconsidered the value of association. He tried to rally, to reframe, to charm, but charm only works when the foundation beneath is soul. Even so, I guarded against becoming cruel for cruelty's sake. I refused to use the very tactics he had used: public shaming, humiliation, leaking intimate details. There is a line between justice and cruelty, and I kept my hands clean of the latter. My aim was to correct the imbalance, not to craft a story where I looked triumphant at his expense. I wanted him to reckon, to reflect, to lose what he could not replace with apologies. In private, when he reached out with contrition, it felt too little and too late. There were practical returns to be made, and I made them. There were apologies I listened to with a face as calm as a courtroom judge. He expected theatrics, I gave him procedure. What surprised me was how potent absence could be. Removing the thing he adored, whether status, control, or a specific possession, did more damage than any argument ever could. He flailed in the space where certainty had been. People who once deferred to him hesitated, offers he'd take for granted were rescinded, rooms where he had been the center quieted when he entered. It was not the spectacle of downfall that stung, but the slow evaporation of entitlement. Watching the neat life he curated become uncomfortable to occupy was a lesson neither of us would forget. It proved that his value had always been performative and conditional, and that when the performance faltered, so did the applause. Through it all I reclaimed more than items and reputations. I reclaimed autonomy. The act of taking back what he valued most, carefully, legally, and with moral clarity, was a declaration that I would not be diminished to a footnote in someone else's story. It reinstated boundaries I had let him erase, and in that restoration there was a freedom I had nearly forgotten. The ultimate payback was never simply about making him lose. It was about reminding myself that taking back what's yours is an act of self-preservation and dignity, a quiet but unmistakable way to show that wrongs can be righted. When everything finally settled, the silence that followed felt heavier than the chaos ever did. The echoes of what I had done lingered not as guilt, but as a strange mixture of relief and emptiness. Revenge had filled the void for a while. It had given my pain a purpose, a direction, something to hold on to when I was drowning in betrayal. But once it was done, I was left with myself again, face to face with the person I had become. There was no applause, no cinematic closure, just the quiet reality of consequences, both his and mine. I could still see the pieces of what used to be us scattered across the memories we once called love. Each moment felt like an artifact of a past life, one I could observe but never inhabit again. In the aftermath, I began to understand that revenge doesn't restore what was lost, it simply balances the scales. He had taken from me trust, certainty, and the naive belief that love alone could protect me from pain. I took something from him too, something that mirrored his loss. And though it gave me peace in fragments, it didn't erase the ache. There's a hollowness that lingers when you fought fire with fire. You win, but the ashes still cling to your hands. I learned to live with those ashes, not as a burden but as proof that I had survived the flames. The person I was before the betrayal died quietly somewhere between heartbreak and retribution, and in her place stood someone who had learned that strength often wears the face of calm detachment. People often imagine revenge as a grand finale, a triumphant act that reclaims dignity in a single decisive moment. But the truth is quieter, slower, more reflective. The aftermath isn't about victory, it's about reckoning. I watched him fall apart in ways I hadn't planned, not through my actions but through his own unraveling. There's something almost poetic about watching justice unfold without interference, seeing someone trapped in the cage they built for others. Yet, instead of satisfact, healing didn't happen overnight. It came in fragments, through ordinary moments. The first morning I didn't check my phone for messages that would never come, the first night I slept without replaying his lies in my head, the first laugh that didn't feel forced. The world around me didn't change, but my perception of it did. Colors started returning, slowly, cautiously. The numbness that had wrapped around my heart began to thaw, and with that came the understanding that revenge had been a bridge, not a destination. It had gotten me across the river of anger and despair, but it was never meant to be the place I stayed. The people who had watched from the sidelines had their opinions. Some called me strong, others cruel. But none of them knew the weight of the silence that followed every decision, the endless nights of questioning whether justice and vengeance were truly different things. I had to learn that peace doesn't come from seeing someone suffer, it comes from no longer needing them to. The aftermath taught me restraint, taught me how to rebuild not from rage but from awareness. When you strip away everything that's been used against you, every manipulation, every deception, you start to recognize what's truly yours. My peace was mine, hard-earned and fragile but real. He eventually tried to reach out, not with apologies worth hearing, but with excuses designed to rewrite history. I listened, not to forgive, but to confirm how far I had come. His words no longer carried weight, his voice no longer held the power to twist my emotions. I had taken back more than he could comprehend, not just the thing he loved most, but the version of myself that no longer needed validation through someone else's affection. That realization was the quiet revolution I had been seeking all along. In the stillness that followed, I began to see the lessons hidden beneath the wreckage. Betrayal teaches you what love should never feel like. Revenge teaches you what power really means. And healing teaches you that both are temporary phases on the path to rediscovery. I stopped replaying the past like a movie, stopped needing to understand the reasons behind his actions. Some betrayals aren't meant to be explained, they're meant to be left behind. What mattered now wasn't why he did what he did, it was why I stayed as long as I did, and how I finally found the strength to walk away. Each day became a quiet act of rebuilding. I filled my space with things that reflected me, not us, not him, just me. Books that reminded me of independence, music that didn't carry memories, laughter that wasn't borrowed. In reclaiming my environment, I reclaimed my identity. It was strange how peaceful life could be once the noise of heartbreak faded into memory. I began to understand that closure isn't given, it's created. It comes the moment you decide to stop needing answers and start choosing peace instead. There were moments when loneliness crept in, when the mind, out of habit, reached for what used to be familiar. But even then, I didn't break. I had already seen the worst of deception, and there was nothing left that could scare me more than being fooled again. That kind of fear turns into freedom once you confront it head-on. I learned to be comfortable in my own company, to find safety not in promises but in self-assurance. The aftermath wasn't about forgetting him, it was about remembering me. The scars remained, invisible but deep, a reminder of how far I had come. I stopped seeing them as evidence of pain and began to see them as proof of transformation. Each one marked a moment where I chose strength over surrender, clarity over confusion, truth over illusion. The woman who once cried over his betrayal now looked in the mirror and saw someone unbreakable, someone who didn't